Welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'll be talking about the Wheel of Fortune card. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is listening daily, rating, reviewing, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon. Supporting me there gives you early access to upcoming podcast episode topics, digital downloads I've created, and monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners. The link will be in the show notes to check that out, and you can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot, for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards that I pull. So let's get into our main discussion. Welcome to Season 2 of the podcast. In the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In Season 2, we're going through the first 13 cards of the major arcana, one per episode. Today, I'm talking about the Wheel of Fortune card. So the Wheel of Fortune, the number associated with this card is 10. In numerology, 10 is about wholeness, unity, transition. If you think of the two digits, you have the sum of 1, which is like a representative of the individual, and 0 as the infinite. And then think about like completion of cycles. So traits associated with 10s are leadership, responsibility, driven to success, strong relationships, and charismatic. So common depictions of the Wheel of Fortune card. You can think of Wheel of Fortune like the TV game show. They often look like that. Again, like sort of a literal wheel is often depicted, or a circle of some kind. They're kind of all about cycles, and often they depict four symbols. Either like sometimes they'll have the letters TARO as like the four almost like cardinal signs on the wheel. Sometimes it depicts four symbols representing the signs of the zodiac. So often it's Scorpio, Taurus, Leo, and Aquarius, and Scorpio representing the water signs, Taurus as earth, Leo as fire, and Aquarius as air. All right, so let's get into how some of the decks that I have depict them. So in the Sassorabito Tarot deck by Stasia Burrington, we see like a person, but it's like the cards focus on their chest. They have black hair and lipstick, and it looks like they almost have like a wheel, or again, sort of like cardinal directions, like a compass, like tattooed on their chest. And this one, it's an interesting depiction because it's like a person, they're wearing a robe, and they like pull it to the side a bit, and it almost looks like they have a tattoo of like a wheel on their chest. And like I said, and often in the cards they have letters on them. So this one has ROTA starting at the top, in sort of clockwise order. And it's sort of said that these letters represent different things. Sometimes it says that they represent tarot. Sometimes, like if you start at the top and go around, it spells ROTA, which is Latin for wheel. And then others say that it has to do with the Torah, which would be like known as the law. So those are kind of different depictions that you see. So this is one of them on there. I have 3 like very different decks today, so it's cool to see the different depictions in my Therapist Who Tarot deck. It's very colorful. It looks like there's like a person in the middle with maybe like a cape, or like they're spinning around. It's surrounded by like a large circle, and then with a bunch of small circles in varying colors, sort of like swirling around them. It almost looks like when you see like a lunar cycle depicted, where you see like, okay, it's a full moon, and then it does this, and then it gets to a new moon, and then it does this. So again, like in this wheel or cyclical depiction. In this one, they sort of use the yellow and purple watercolors to sort of depict like all of the circles around it are a little bit different, and none of them are like full circles. So again, it does sort of remind me of like a moon. circle, like waxing and waning. And all of these cards sort of give the impression of motion. Sometimes that's because when you think about a wheel, right, like usually when we use wheels, they're turning. um, and this deck has the Therapist Who Tarot deck always has a word or phrase at the bottom underneath, like the name of the card. And the phrase for this one is turning point. And then in the Anima Mundi deck, the Wheel of Fortune card is depicted as like what you would use like to steer a ship. Like so the wheel is suspended in the air. It sort of has like stars in the background, like it must be nighttime. And then it has again sort of this like cardinal directions look. It's very like symmetrical. Um, it's the exact same type of wheel that's in the Sasarabito deck. It just doesn't have the letters at the four corners of it. And then underneath the wheel, it shows like bones of an animal is what it looks like. It looks like sort of like a rib cage and some other bones, perhaps like of a deer. And then it has plants sprouting up from the dirt. And I'll get into what I think that kind of means in the next section. So going back to the Sasarabito tarot deck, if we think about meanings, this is like a card of destiny. Again, if you think of like you've watched the TV game show Wheel of Fortune, I feel like it's a pretty good depiction in that like there's all these different things on the wheel, right? You never quite know what it's gonna be. Like yeah, like or just like any sort of prize wheel, right? Where like sometimes they're really good things, sometimes they're okay things, sometimes they're bad things depicted. And so it's sort of like you're going to spin, right? Like you're going to see what your destiny is going to be, see what it lands on. And there's always sort of that element of change. Like examples of, would be like change in position or fortune or mindset, like symbolically. And as it talks about in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, like this is a turning point. So usually a turning point means like it's an opportunity, right? There's great possibility. And like, again, this is a fate or destiny card. So if you did pull it in a tarot deck, um, again, it's sort of like imagine spinning that wheel on the TV show and seeing what you get, or like a big prize wheel. You never really know if it's going to be like good or bad, or sort of like what level of excitement or prize it's going to be, but something is going to change, right? No matter what, when you spin a wheel, like, right, it feels random. Like it feels like it's going to be different every time. Um, in the tarot deck description for this card, it talks about this is a card of action, expansion, speed, and change. And again, the wheel is often marked with the letters ROTA or TARO, which they talk about in this one stands for the elements earth, air, fire, water. And then in this deck, there's sometimes a quote underneath in the tarot deck description that goes with the tarot card pulled. And so the quote for this one is, "See it for what it is, not what you want it to be," by Sonia Teklai. Which is very interesting, right? Like it's sort of this like, I guess, right, sometimes we have very wishful thinking, or right, maybe you see a symbol or something happens and you're like, great, I know exactly what's going to happen, right? Like, oh, I had tried to control for this outcome, or right, I tried to make this happen. But sometimes you have to really look at like, what is the reality of the situation and not just like what it could be. I think that's what this quote is kind of about. So, like I said, in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, the imagery on this card is very evocative. Honestly, I am drawn to it a lot more than the other two cards that I'm talking about today, just because I think the wheels on them feel more stationary, and in this one, like the it looks like it's almost turning. Like as I stare at the card, it's got this very cyclical aspect again of like turning of the wheel. I love the colors of it. I like this person or like figure in the middle is super like dark blue and pink and purpley, and then it's like very lighter, more muted colors around the edges, and it almost looks like the person is like enclosed or transposed onto like a gray moon background, which is probably also why I sort of think of the moon when I look at it. And again, if you think of like the moon cycle, right, like it's not that any one part of the cycle is great and the other parts are bad. It's just that it's always transitioning. The light is always changing. we're always moving in relation to the moon. Yeah, that kind of thing. And in the Therapist Who Tarot deck, there is no book that goes along with it that talks about the cards additionally, but there are questions on the back. So the questions associated with this card are: what change are you resisting? Where is the tension in your life? And what is your definition of success? Very interesting. So the Anima Mundi deck um, is interesting because this is the first. I went actually and looked back, and this is the first of the major arcana cards for this deck that don't depict like a specific animal or plant itself, but this is more like a scene. And again, it sort of shows like a ship's wheel that you would use to steer like a pirate ship, is what I think of, like on the high seas. And then like there's sort of this life cycle representation, right, of showing like bones on the ground and then also like plants growing out of it. They look quite small, the plants, like there's a couple different like maybe types or like lengths of growing time. One's really bushy, kind of looks like a fern, and other ones look more like flowers or crops or something like that. And so there's again this sort of like endings and beginnings. Um, a quote I pulled from the tarot deck description for this card is: life is full of ups and downs, and those forces are sometimes out of your control. Like a spinning wheel, things come and go in a cycle. So it talks about not being complacent during good times, but like being grateful and appreciating it, right? Not just assuming that all the time is going to be great, but also that during bad times, remember that things will eventually change and get better. And it makes me think of kind of like living seasonally, like if you think of like winter, spring, summer, fall seasons, like in all of those seasons, right, you might have like a favorite season, but there's usually like kind of ups and downs to every season. There's parts we enjoy and maybe some that we don't, but the seasons always change. And like, no, right, we have all 4 seasons in a year, but no one year looks exactly like the last. The seasons don't look the same, even though, again, they're sort of like larger trends. Um, Another quote from this tarot card in the deck description says: go with the flow, remain optimistic, and learn to adapt to the constant changes. And I love that, like adapting to constant changes, because I feel like that's what it's like to be a human. And I think it's always ironic because I think, like, when I talk to other people, um, I feel like I'm aware, right, that humans are built to be very adaptable. It's supposedly part of why we've lasted so long on the planet. But also, like, most people, like, hate change, right? Like, we reject it. We don't really necessarily like change in routine. It can always be kind of like emotionally challenging. We really like to kind of find like patterns or routines to like kind of make things easier, or perhaps like control, or like guess what's going to happen next, right? Sometimes that like wheel turning can feel very random, but also like, I don't know, frantic. Like it's kind of like it feels really out of control, right? So words associated with this card are life cycles, destiny, ups and downs, and karma. So, in one of the books I have, Fearless Tarot: How to Give a Positive Reading in Any Situation by Elliot Adam. In this book, they talk about the epitome of this card being that we have to make peace with life's unpredictability, right? And that's kind of what I was just talking about, right? Like things are always going to change, seasons change, years change, we age, right? Like things are always changing. A quote from there, it says: the center of the wheel represents your center, the seat of your best self. If you can find your way home to your center, then the random things that occur in the world outside of your control will not feel as disturbing. And honestly, I feel this in the era of like Trump 2.0. Um, so those of us like against Trump have to figure out ways to keep doing the work that needs to be done, whether that's like advocacy, protecting our communities, or doing what we can to fight back. Um, if you know what your values are, right? Like I feel like this card is telling us to not let the onslaught of news like bring us down, but just kind of like let it slide off our back. Um, and I think, right, there are things we know are going to happen or like can plan for or maybe assume. And that doesn't mean it makes the situation when it does happen less horrifying to live under, right? I'm not like excusing his actions or saying that like, oh, just let it go. But it's just that by viewing what's happening as part of like, right, that wheel of fortune, right, the current cycle of the wheel, we know that things will change again in the future. And I really believe that like part of his strategy is that he wants us to be overwhelmed and reactionary and unable to organize and fight back. Um, Another quote from this book for the card says, when the wheel of fortune appears, it is time to get off the emotional roller coaster and detach from external dramas. And I really take that as like, it's time to center yourself at the middle of the wheel and just let those outside parts turn, right? If you think about, again, sort of like a steering wheel or like a wheel that like the inner part, yes, it's turning, but there's like less revolutions. I don't, not necessarily, but the movements are smaller in the middle. So you have to let those outside parts turn how they will, because we don't really have control over anything, but or everything anyway. And sort of that's just kind of like the message I was taking from this card today, was being like, okay, yeah, like stuff is going to change around the outside of the wheel, right? Things are going to go. It might turn one way, it might go another, it might not land where we think it will, but we have to figure out what our values are and like stay in that middle section, I think, to like remain more centered for ourselves, being able to, right, still make the actions we want to, like center ourselves and our values. All right, so let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today. And today I'm going to be pulling from the Goddess of Love tarot deck. All right. All right. So I pulled what in this deck is called the Crone of Pentacles, but traditionally called the King of Pentacles. And I pulled the card in reverse today. And actually, in this tarot deck, Pentacles is the last suit. So this is literally the last page of the tarot deck guidebook. And as I was pulling this card, I was thinking about the questions on the back of the Therapist Who Tarot card for the Wheel of Fortune, which were, what change are you resisting? Where is the tension in your life? And what is your definition of success? All right, so I'm going to look at the upright description first, and then I'll sort of try to interpret what I think this means that it's reversed. So the upright depiction, the elemental correspondence for this card is Fire of Earth. Again, pentacles are usually representative of earth or like earth signs. So it says, the Crone of Pentacles is a living ancestress with the experience and wisdom that allows her to ground through mind and body to make whatever decisions need to be made. She is the teacher, the guide, the mentor, the high priestess, or the circle keeper who leads you into the secrets of the witch. She reflects the wisdom of the wild, buried within flesh, bone, and body. It's time to release outdated structures and logical thinking and step into her sensual waters. Claim the identity of the wise woman for yourself. She knows the language of the earth and its plants and spirits, the power of the body, and the wisdom that comes from intuition. That's interesting. It makes me think of the Wheel of Fortune card in the Anima Mundi deck, where we had, again, sort of like plants, earth, and animals depicted in that with the bones and the plants that were growing up. So sort of, again, like a very grounded depiction of the Wheel of Fortune. So it talks about that when the Crone of Pentacles comes up in reversed, she represents a fracture between body and earth. Return to the potency of witchcraft to reconnect with the natural world as a reflection of the sacred vessel of your heart and find teachers who can help. The affirmation that's listed for this card says, I trust my magic, I trust my wild nature, and I trust the wisdom and pleasure of the body. Or of my body. So yeah, so in this deck, again, Crone is kind of the king. She renames the Night the Night Queen King to Witch, and then Queen, and then Crone. So sort of like the Maiden Mother Crone, which again is sort of like the, I don't know, feminine version of like the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's sort of how I think about it. Or like, again, if you think of like an aging cycle, like again, it's very depicting of this like wheel of fortune, just in that like you have the whole cycle. You have like the maiden, you have the mother, you have the crone, like the aging cycle, and also that it starts over again. Um, so yeah, it sounds like this card is calling us to like reconnect with earth, with like grounding, with your spiritual practice, perhaps. So maybe that's where there's like some tension in your life, or maybe there's some aspect of change that you're resisting that's related to that, right? Maybe you've been grinding in work and not making as much time for, again, maybe your spiritual practices or the things that you know are good for you and your body, like going on walks or, again, like whatever your practice is, meditation, things like that. And that it's really calling us to say or to think about, like, okay, like, right, like, what happens when you neglect those things for too long, right? Are we going to end up, as our wheel of fortune, going to end up in a space that we're not into, right? Or maybe that wheel of fortune is going to spin to burnout if we're not careful. So just, right, really thinking about, like, what are you feeling like maybe your body is telling you, or what have you been neglecting, and what's something that maybe over the next month, over the next season, over the next quarter, like something that you can try to reconnect with. Again, sort of something that's a practice or something that feels like something that helps you feel grounded or closer to your values, like we talked about with the inner part of the Wheel of Fortune. All right, so thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. And just as a reminder, the podcast will come out daily, Monday through Friday, for all of 2025. All right, see you soon. Bye bye.